How do the Buffalo Bills measure up to other top contenders in the AFC? We're comparing the defenses of the Bills, Bengals, and Chiefs today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, folks, at the end of last week, I did an episode where I compared the Bills, Chiefs, and Bengals on offense just after doing the same within the AFC East division. And today on the podcast, we're going to extend that conversation to the defense. And then at the end of this, I'll be able to stack up the Bills, Bengals, and Chiefs, at least on paper in terms of the roster, the quality of talent on the roster. Again, not really counting for any of the X factors, coaching, anything like that. This is just the talent on paper entering the 2023 season. And so we're going to go through the defensive side of the football. We'll focus in on the edge group, the interior defensive line, linebackers, cornerbacks, and safety. And through this, I've went through and graded each position group within the unit on a scale of 1 to 5. A 5 means it's perfect. This is elite starters, quality depth. A 4 is excellent. A number 3 is average. A 2 is below average. And 1 is just simply not good enough in terms of what is expected in the NFL. And also, as I've explained, it is weighted towards positional value. So positions like edge and corner, who both of those are the two big positions on a defense, they have a higher weight assigned to them within the overall scoring structure. So edge rushers and corners are worth more than linebackers and safeties. And so that is the methodology. The teams are the Bills, Chiefs, and Bengals. The reason is that's the big three in the AFC. Those are the teams that feel like they're the class of the conference. I'd be surprised if one of those three didn't represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. And so I want to figure out where the Bills measure up or how the Bills measure up against those teams. So let's get into it. We'll start with the edge rushers. The Bills have Von Miller, Greg Rousseau, Leonard Floyd, A.J. Epinesa, of course, Shaq Lawson, Boogie Basham. I give the Bills a grade of a 4.25 here. And again, I explained this in depth when I did the AFC East defensive episode. But in Von Miller, you have a premier starter at the position. Greg Rousseau entering year 3 is already a quality starter that we're looking to take another step. Leonard Floyd's been unbelievably consistent for 3 seasons now. And A.J. Epinesa in year 3 had 6.5 sacks last year, not to mention a really solid player in Shaq Lawson and a player in Boogie Basham that's entering year 3, and we're hoping to see a little bit more out of him. The Bengals, I gave that a 4.25. So that's an excellent score, maybe a little bit above an excellent score, just given the depth and the quality of those top 3. The Bengals have a nice edge group as well. Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard, they're 2 leading guys. Really enjoy Trey Hendrickson, a high-effort player, can rush the passer, can set the edge against the run, can get off blocks, makes plays behind the backfield. He's their best player on the edge. And then it's Sam Hubbard. Sam Hubbard's a really, really good run defender, high-effort guy. Not as dynamic of a pass rusher as Trey Hendrickson, but he gets after the quarterback pretty well. Really quality top 2 starters for them. And then their depth, Myles Murphy, their first-round pick, towards the end of the first round, he'll provide depth in addition to a couple of recent draft picks that have been flashy in Cam Sample and Joseph Asai. So I think they have pretty good depth. 2 good starters. Myles Murphy, who's has a lot of physical upside and length and athleticism. to go off of. I think this is a really good group. I give it a 4. So I give it a tick below the Bills, and that's because I think if you look at it like this, Von Miller, Trey Hendrickson, probably the edge to Von Miller, but both premier players at the position. Greg Rousseau, Sam Hubbard, I think pretty comparable. I think there's more ceiling with Greg Rousseau. But then I think Leonard Floyd is as the third edge is better than a rookie in Miles Murphy. And then we get to the Chiefs. The Chiefs have a lot of youth here, but nothing that is absolutely proven, right? George Karlaftis and Felix Anudike-Uzomah, their first-round pick this year and last year. Karlaftis, flashy, got better throughout the course of the season. High motor player, doesn't have a ton of length, doesn't have a ton of agility, but power and his ability to really just play with high energy allows him to make a lot of plays. And then Felix Anudike-Uzomah is a player that's going to allow them to be more versatile with how they attack the pocket. He can win from wider alignments in addition to some tighter alignments, and I think that's going to help them be more versatile. They signed Charles Omenihu from the San Francisco 49ers, who I like for them. I think he can play as that 5-tech play, as a guy that can reduce inside and rush some interior gaps from time to time as well. And then Mike Dana, who I think is a very high-quality rotational player. I think they got 4 really nice players here, but I don't know that any of them is at a point right now where you could say, okay, that's an above-average player. That's a guy that can take over football games. So I give it a 3, a nice average grade. A lot of ceiling here when you look at Karlaftis and Felix Anudike-Uzomah, and even Charles Omenihu, who's probably going to play the most snaps of his career this coming season. But we haven't necessarily seen any consistent stretch of dominance from these players. And of course, a lot of that is just because they're young. So I give that a 3. So as for the edge rusher conversation, I had the Bills first, 4.25. The Bengals just a tick below at a 4, and the Chiefs at a 3. On the interior defensive line, the Bills feature Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, Poona Ford, and that's a really good top 3. 2 good A-gap defenders in Jones and Ford. Ford proving his ability to play in some wider alignments, and then, of course, Ed Oliver as the 3-tech, and then a couple of nice depth players in Jordan Phillips and Tim Settle. Jordan Phillips when he's healthy, and then we'll see on Tim Settle. I give that a 4. I think that's an excellent group. 2 quality starters and really high-quality depth. For the Bengals, they've got a dude in DJ Reader who every time I get a chance to talk about, I rave about him because he's such a fun player that just dominates his space, can really reset and play on the other side of the line of scrimmage, has rush ability for a nose tackle. I really like him. And that defense, got a chance to kind of see it at times last year without him, and you could tell he wasn't on the field. He's really a game-changing type player. BJ Hill is another, probably like just a B-plus version of DJ Reader in some ways, a big, athletic, I guess more of a nose tackle type, but can rush. I really like them. That's a really formidable top 2. They can really control the interior of the defensive line with those 2 guys on the field. Now, after that, I have some questions about their depth. Zach Carter was a guy they drafted in 2022 out of Florida, who I think struggled as a rookie, has some rush ability, kind of a tweener as a edge player, an interior guy. I think that he needs to take a big step for them this year. I think that's going to be an important part of their defense. And then Josh Tupou, who's been there for a while, is another nose tackle type player that's not quite as dynamic as Reader or Hill. But Reader and Hill really just elevates this unit. So I'm concerned about the depth, but I'm not concerned about Reader and Hill. I give this a 4. For the Chiefs, they got Chris Jones. I mean, this guy, of all the defensive tackles among these 3 teams, the Bills, Bengals, and Chiefs, Chris Jones is the best player by far. Just an unbelievable talent, unreal athleticism, knows how to get off blocks, makes tons of plays behind the line of scrimmage, consistent pressure player, can win from a variety of alignments. I mean, he's one of the premier defensive tackles in all of football. Now, after him, I don't think they have much. It's really kind of lacking. So they have the best player of any team, but collectively, I don't know that this measures up quite as well against the Bills and the Bengals. Derek Nottie, he's a serviceable nose tackle, but even he's very up and down. Tershawn Wharton is a rotational guy. Byron Cowart, who's bounced around through a few teams and not really ever provided consistent play. So I think it's Chris Jones. You love that. Derek Nottie, okay. And then, man, we just don't really have much. I know that they're going to rely on a lot of those edge players to rush inside, and they have a lot of versatility there. with Amenahue and Mike Dana and even Karlaftis to an extent. But I don't love this group outside of Chris Jones. But Chris Jones' presence does elevate the entire score, so I give it a 3.75. So Bills, Bengals at a 4, Chiefs at a 3.75. All right, we're going to continue this conversation focusing on the linebackers and the corners here in just a moment. But first, I need to tell you about FanDuel. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on all the action than over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. Folks, I love betting over at FanDuel. They have a safe, secure, and easy-to-use app, great promotions every day, and there's a lot of action that you can get in on. It's not just baseball, but the football's futures bets are so fun. So whether you want to bet the over-under on win totals, the over-under on player props for rushing stats, receiving stats, passing stats, they have week 1 lines available already. There's future bets in terms of the awards. So much fun stuff to get in over at America's #1 sportsbook. So don't miss your chance to snag that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. All right, folks, let's talk about the linebackers and cornerbacks for these top 3 teams in the AFC. We'll start with the linebacker position. For the Bills, it's Matt Milano, super good player, right? One of the better linebackers in all of football. And then we don't know, right? This cast of characters that are competing to be the inside backer replacing Tremaine Edmonds includes Terrell Bernard, a 3rd-round pick from 2022, Dorian Williams, a 3rd-round pick from 2023, Tyrell Dodson, who's been around for like the last 4 years but hasn't played much, AJ Klein, I guess, Balin Spector. Like, who's it going to be? Well, it's going to be a question mark as who it's going to be, no matter which of those players winds up starting next to Matt Milano. But in a way, kind of like what we talked about with the Chiefs and defensive tackle, Matt Milano's presence brings up this grade just because he exists, and then you certainly have a question mark about who his running mate is. But I give this a 3. I think that when half of your starting linebacker pair is Matt Milano, there's a baseline there that you feel comfortable with, and you certainly hope that the Bills don't have a liability next to him. But I think that there's a baseline level of comfort that I get with Matt Milano's presence at weak side linebacker to go with whoever wins the starting Mike job. Now, the Bengals and Chiefs are a lot more settled at linebacker. The Bengals, their top 2 guys, I mean, I love this pair, Logan Wilson, Germaine Pratt, big dudes that can play downhill into the line of scrimmage. They can chase and run and play in space. They can cover. It's a really high-quality pair of guys. Germaine Pratt just earned a contract extension after playing his best season in 2022. And then Logan Wilson, ever since kind of late 2021 into 2022, I mean, this guy has really emerged as kind of their guy on the second level. Really big fan of his game. I think it's a high-quality pair of linebackers that are they offer like a unique blend that doesn't really exist in today's NFL, where you have size and take-on ability and, guys that can really play downhill, but also rangy and athletic guys. I mean, they've really threaded the needle here. That's really tough to do in terms of modern day linebacking cores. So Logan Wilson, Germaine Pratt, I give it a solid 4. That's an excellent pair. For the Chiefs, this team has a lot of depth at linebacker. I mean, pretty crazy depth overall. You'd think that their top 2 guys are Nick Bolton and Willie Gay. I mean, Nick Bolton's been a team captain. He's an absolute hammer playing downhill. There's a tone-setting presence about him in the way that he plays. And, maybe he's not the most rangy coverage guy, but they certainly have players that can make up for that with their other options. But there's like an emotional leader presence that you get with Nick Bolton. And man, he's an absolute hammer downhill. His running mate is Willie Gay, who's extremely athletic, can play in space and cover. I think it's a nice complementary group. But then outside of that, you have even more options. You have Drew Tranquill, who he's been injured a lot. He's coming over from the Chargers, but last year he was healthy and he was a high quality player last year. If he can be healthy, I mean, Drew Tranquill can be at least a sufficient starter. And so they have nice depth behind Nick Bolton. And then Leo Chenal, who they drafted, I think, in the 3rd round last year, has this blitzing ability and is a young player that I think can offer a lot to the unit. And they kind of sprinkled him in at times last year. And I'm very curious to see how his role evolves in year 2. And so this is a group here in Kansas City that has depth, has complementary skill sets, and just there's a lot to like. There's a lot to like about how they can unleash these players and take advantage of different defensive personnel groupings. I give this a 4 as well. I don't know that Bolton and Willie Gay quite measure up to Wilson and Pratt, but the depth of Tranquill and Chenal to go with Bolton and Gay, I think, puts it on par with the Bengals. So both the Bengals and Chiefs earning a 4, the Bills with a 3 at linebacker. Let's now talk about the cornerback situation. And I think all of these teams have very similar cornerback situations where there's a really good player, some very intriguing young players, and a very, very good slot player, right? So let's break it down. The Bills, Tre White, that's their very good player coming off of the injury. Obviously, still, we're excited to see Tre White be Tre White again this year, as he's, a year and a half removed from this thing. And, you saw him kind of heat up at times last year and took him a while to get back, but I think he'll be fully back this year. Taron Johnson, who's one of the premier slot players in the entire NFL, certainly one of the top 3 or 5 slot corners in the league. And then this group of Kaiir Elam, Dane Jackson, Christian Benford that we expect to compete for the number 2 job. Kaiir Elam, obviously the recent first-round pick that has the most upside, but certainly the team has a lot of comfort in Dane Jackson and Christian Benford as well, that are all in that mix to start opposite of Tre'Davious White. I give this a 3.75. I think Tre White and Taron Johnson, those are really good assets at the corner position. And then somewhat of a question mark otherwise, but good options. I give it a 3.75. The Bengals, Chidobe Awuzie. I don't know that he's as good as Tre'Davious White, but another player that is, I think, a legitimate top-tier corner in the league. He is coming off of an injury, missed most of last season, and so his return is going to be interesting. Is it a bumpy road? Does he come back quick? What type of mental challenges are there, right? I think we've learning a lot about how players come back from injuries. We'll see on Awuzie. Then they have Mike Hilton, who, just like Taron Johnson, is one of the premier slot corners in the entire NFL. Mike Hilton I'm not going to say might. I think he is the best blitzing slot corner in the league. Just a really, really good blitzer, but also like run defender from the slot. And when you play a lot of base nickel defense, your slot corners have run fit responsibilities, and Mike Hilton handles those very, very well. And then Cam Taylor-Britt, who was a rookie last year that got playing time and seemingly got more and more confident and emerged. And I think that they're pretty happy with him as the starter right now at corner for them, and that looks like he could be a fixture for a long time. And then some intriguing depth in Sidney Jones, and then DJ Turner out of Michigan, who they drafted, who I really, really like. I think it's a lot like the Bills in terms of the makeup of their group. I give it a 3.75, just like I did Buffalo. Then you get to Kansas City, and similar story, but even more youth here for KC. L'Jarius Sneed's their top guy, has emerged as a quality starter, right in that same lens as a Chidobe Awuzie or a Tre White. And then they had 3 rookies last year that played and gained experience. I mean, big experience, right? Playoffs, Super Bowl. And, I think that there's a lot of ceiling with these players. Trent McDuffie was their top pick last year, or they're one of their first round picks to go with Karlaftis. Had some injuries, but whenever he was on the field, he played really well and showed the ability to play in the slot as well as outside. I think he's going to be a quality starter for a long time. And then Josh Williams and Jalen Watson wound up playing a lot of football for this team and had flashy moments, certainly had their issues at times, but entering year 2 with a lot of experience, I think is going to allow them to support Sneed and McDuffie and provide a formidable group that can play press man coverage. You know how Kansas City likes to play up in the face of receivers at the line of scrimmage and jam and be aggressive. And those guys really kind of fit that style of play. Now, I think there's a lot less proven here amongst this group. So I give it a 3.5, kind of a tick behind the Bills and Bengals, but not far. So Bills, Bengals, 3.75 at corner, and the Chiefs at a 3.5. All right, folks, we got to get to the safeties. We got to talk about the overall scoring on defense, and we got to talk about the overall scoring considering offense and defense right after a very, very quick break. All right, we're going to close out this conversation about the Bills, Bengals, and Chiefs, comparing them entering the season. Before we do finish, I would like to invite you and tell you about the Locked On Bills subtext community, something fairly new that we're offering. If you'd like to join, there's a link in the show notes for today. So if you're on YouTube or wherever you listen to the podcast, click on the show notes. You'll see a link to join. Here's what you get. My favorite part is the one-on-one text conversations that I get to have with you guys. So if you have questions, comments, you can text me at any time, and I'll respond. And getting to know you guys better has been awesome. Getting to share more of myself has been really, really cool. So that's my favorite part. You also get herd mentality priority. We have some exclusive content. I'll send out my first reaction to all major Bills news. So when they announce the extension for Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane, the Diggs drama, signing players, you get my first reaction through the subtext. We've done some giveaways already. So a lot of fun stuff. Check it out if you're interested. Again, a link in today's show notes to join the Locked On Bills subtext community. And again, nothing changes with the normal delivery of this podcast. Simply an extra layer of engagement for anybody who might want it. All right, we got safety and final scores here to close out this conversation. At safety, the Bills, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Taylor Rapp, Damar Hamlin, Dean Marlowe, it's a 5. That's the dreamy safety room. 2 proven, experienced, high-impact starters in Poyer and Hyde. And then Taylor Rapp is your third safety. That guy should be starting for some team. And I think the Bills are going to enjoy him off the bench in some sub packages. And then like Damar Hamlin, Dean Marlowe after that. Come on now. That's a premier safety group. That's a 5. The Bengals. This is going to be an interesting situation for Cincinnati at safety, because their top 2 starters last year, Jesse Bates and Von Bell, they're no longer around. They both went to the NFC South. Von Bell with the Panthers, Jesse Bates with the Falcons. Now, I think they were somewhat expecting this, right? That was a big storyline last year for Cincinnati, was their safety pair, and some struggles that they've had with Jesse Bates and getting a contract extension hammered out, and kind of always felt like that was going to be his last year. And then Von Bell, would they pay him? And then they drafted Dax Hill in the first round out of Michigan a year early to kind of get ahead of this. And he didn't play much last year, but he's been around for a season, and he's primed to be one of their starters. But it's going to have a new makeup here, and I think it's something to monitor for Cincinnati is how they adjust, right? 2 veterans, 2 very nice complementary skill sets in Bates and Bell. Now you're turning the page and leaning on some different players that have never played together. So Dax Hill is the interesting player. Like I said, a first-round pick that they picked a year ahead, right, to kind of get ahead of the departure of Bates and Bell. I like Dax Hill quite a bit, but we've never really seen him play extensively in the NFL. We have a lot to learn about what he's going to be. They signed Nick Scott from the Rams. I thought Nick Scott was a flashy player. I like him. I think he deserves an opportunity to start. But again, how does that all work together? How quickly does it come together is something to be mindful of. And then a couple of depth pieces. Michael Thomas, who's a premier special teams player. They drafted Jordan Battle out of Alabama. I'm fairly low on Battle. I think this is obviously about Hill and Scott. I give this a 2.75. So just a lot to learn about this group. There's certainly talent, but it's got to come together. And until I see it, I give it a 2.75. Then you have the Chiefs. Chiefs are another team that have had some turnover at the safety position. They no longer have Juan Thornhill, but they signed Mike Edwards from Tampa Bay, who I think is a nice depth player for them. Their starters will be Justin Reed and Brian Cook. Justin Reed, who they signed in free agency last year to come over from Houston. Versatile player. I think his impact can be greater this year than it was last year. I think stepping into that situation, kind of finding his way as they had other guys on the roster still, like I mentioned, Juan Thornhill, and a lot of young players in that secondary. I think it's kind of a tough situation to step into. I think he'll be better this year. Brian Cook, who they drafted out of Cincinnati, was kind of their third safety last year. I thought he was pretty effective. And now he gets a bigger role this year. And then Mike Edwards, who I think is a steady player in the NFL. So I'm not sure that they have super high impact players here. Maybe Brian Cook will be. Justin Reed is flashy. I give this a 3.5. I think it's a really good trio with some ceiling, but maybe not the type of ceiling that would suggest that this is potentially one of the best safety situations in the league. It's certainly serviceable. I give it a 3.5. So at safety, I have the Bills at a 5, the Chiefs at a 3.5, and the Bengals at a 2.75. So if you guys remember, offensively, the Bills didn't quite measure up as well. They were fine, but the Bengals and Chiefs, I both scored ahead of the Bills. On defense, the Bills really make up a lot of ground. So again, the way that the scoring works is each unit is scored. There's a percentage of possible points. It's weighted towards positional value. And so the Bills received 82% of the available points on defense. That was number one. Number two is the Bengals at 75% of the points achieved, and then the Chiefs at 70% of the points achieved on defense. And so, look, I think that the Bills do have the best defense of these three teams, and 12% higher and 7% higher than the Chiefs and Bengals respectively is a pretty sizable gap. But there's like I said, there's things that aren't accounted for here. This is just talent on paper, the way that I perceive it. I think the Chiefs are behind defensively in terms of talent, and I don't think that's a hot take, right? I think that's to be expected. They've had a lot of turnover on defense, and a lot of that's probably intentional. But they seem to find a way to kind of piece it together every year and maximize their talent. And I think they're going to be extremely versatile with their fronts, especially this year. And, a lot of young players that could move the needle up quite a bit. Cincinnati, I don't know that their depth is quite as strong as it needs to be in certain spots on defense. A new safety tandem. What does their depth at defensive tackle really look like right now? At corner, I'm excited about Chidobe Awuzie being back, but he's got to come back and play, right, and see what he looks like. And Cam Taylor-Britt in year two, what does that look like? And if one of those two doesn't work out, do they actually have meaningful depth that they can lean on, right? I think there's some questions. But obviously a great coach in Lou Anarumo, who I have nothing but huge respect for, and how multiple his defenses are and how he adjusts and how he game plans. I mean, that's huge. And so I think the Bills have the best talent on paper, but there's X factors here that aren't accounted for. Now, in terms of overall final scores, I took the final score on defense, the final score on offense, divided it by 2 to kind of get the average. And the way that these teams settle is the Bills and Bengals both earned 79% of the available points, and the Chiefs 76% of the points, which I think is pretty fair. Again, the conversation on defense really brought the Chiefs down. But that's how it's always been. Their conversation seems to be, well, is this defense going to hold them back? Well, I think because of how good their offense is, and that creates an urgency from opposing offenses to play their best football, and then they press and they don't play well, and the Chiefs are very aggressive on defense, and they've been able to piece it together, obviously, despite having some holes on that unit. But I mean, this is the point of this was to talk about how the Bills, Bengals, and Chiefs measure up, and really how the Bills measure up against the Bengals and Chiefs. And we've only seen the Bills play the Bengals once with Joe Burrow at quarterback. And obviously that wasn't a pretty sight, the 27-10 home loss in the playoffs to Cincinnati last year. The last time we saw the Bills play a game, that was it. We haven't really seen a meaningful sample size of games against Cincinnati to get a great feel for how they measure up. Now, certainly when you look at that one game, it's very lopsided towards Cincinnati. And I think the Bills are obviously well aware of that and have probably been mindful of their path to beating Cincinnati this year, who they're going to have to play in the regular season. And then I'm sure the Bills at some point are going to play either the Bengals or the Chiefs in the postseason, right? I certainly hope they do. And so there's going to be some matchups coming that I'm sure the Bills brass is fully aware of. Look at the Bills' recent history against the Chiefs. The Bills have won 2 of the last 3 and probably should have won each of the last 3. The one loss, obviously, 13 seconds, right? Game the Bills should have won, right? So, for the success Kansas City's had, and I can't argue with that. I mean, they've been unbelievable. They're the class of the entire NFL right now. There's no question. The Bills have matched up quite well the last 3 times. I mean, you go back, the Bills beat them by 18 during the regular season in 2022, and then 13 seconds. And then last year they go into Kansas City and win. And so I think those, coming from the AFC Championship game in 2020 and what that regular season game looked like, which was a goofy game that was rescheduled and played in Buffalo, and the Bills had a unique game plan and still had a chance kind of there late. The Bills have held their own against Kansas City. It's not one of those situations where it's a mismatch in any way, shape, or form. Now, Kansas City's obviously had more team success, probably, a couple Super Bowls, obviously, in the last 5 years, and have been to 6 consecutive AFC Championship games. I mean, there's certainly a lot that Kansas City can pound their chest for, but in terms of head-to-head matchups, I think you have to be pretty satisfied with how the Bills have been able to play Kansas City, especially the last 3. All right, so there you have it. We've compared the Bills to the AFC East. We've compared the Bills to the top contenders in the AFC, and the entire point here was to lay a good foundation for what to expect this coming year and familiarize ourselves with the dynamics of the teams that are most important to the Bills, which I think are the Patriots, Dolphins, and Jets, and of course the Bengals and the Chiefs. The rest of this week, we've got 3 more episodes coming for you. We're going to get to herd mentality, of course. I'm going to have a guest. Bruce Nolan is going to stop by for a podcast. I'm looking forward to that very much. And then The Athletic, they do a survey every single year, a fan survey. And I want to go through it. It's 25 questions, and I want to give you my answers to those 25 questions. So we have some fun stuff coming up the rest of the week. Don't miss anything. Make sure that you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again tomorrow.